not down. This is the Situation Room. It's the only way to start your day.
3rd day of November 2023. It's Thursday. And as usual, we have our Justice Thursday conversation coming up shortly. We're joined in the studio by Rose Washuka. She is the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya. And Dr. Sam Muller, who is the CEO of the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law, Hill. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the show. Welcome, Dr. Muller. You're from the Hague.
I'm from The Hague, but also from the world. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, someone from The Hague being in the studio would have been okay. Some big thing.
Question will be, who have they come from?
Yes. From The Hague.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're here.
Yes.
And it's justice related. Well,
Yes, I remember that.
Let's do something. This, getting into the shop.
You're in the shop?
Yeah.
How many are you giving me? Are you feeling generous this morning? You're that guy.
Yeah, pass around.
So,
Chiti,
Yes.
give Dr. Muller this. He knows what kiwi is. I'm sure.
you know what kiwi is, don't you?
If he
I
doesn't,
do.
he will know.
Let me tell you. So kiwi is a polish brand. In fact, when people would go to look for shoe polish, they would say, I'm going to buy kiwi. It was not, I'm going to buy shoe polish. So the name became synonymous with the need. So that was the thing. There was nothing else. And so it stepped into people's lives and it gives folks the opportunity to shine. So look good while you go to school. And then it became synonymous with children going to school and having their shoes polished properly. Now, Kiwi stepping up in a different way and saying, you know, we want you to look good, but we also want you to be well prepared. Because January comes with a lot of responsibility, especially when it comes to school fees. So Kiwi says, how about we make it a little bit easier? And we're going to ask you to walk into any place where the Kiwi is available in the new design, of course, with this new logo.
Yeah.
Make your purchase of whatever size, and then pick up your phone and dial *459*5#. And when you pop the lid of the tin that you buy, underneath is a code. You're going to put that code as you dial that number, and you instantly win airtime or data. Interestingly enough as well, you get to enter into a draw. And 4 people every week are winning 35,000 shillings that goes directly to school fees. So you can show up with your kiwi, your shoes shined, and there's money in the bank so that you don't lose any school days. It's great.
Big thing.
It's big stuff,
Impressive.
isn't it?
You know
do it
kiwi,
today?
Dr. Muller, right?
Yes,
You've used kiwi.
I did.
Wow.
Yes.
See?
Oh, I know it. I know
Yep.
it. I know it.
It's a global brand.
Yep.
Now, to welcome you to the conversation, CT has the day's proverb, and this week's proverbs are from Namibia.
Yes. This week's proverbs are from the Republic of Namibia. Now, the interesting thing about this country, when you Google Namibia and you look at the stats, among the things that they list is the CJ. Most countries, you have a prime minister, you have the political arm of government, you have prime minister, minister, president, vice president. I haven't come across king yet, but you have all those. Now, this country actually has a CJ, Chief Justice, gentleman by the name of Peter Sifute. Then they have a deputy prime minister, a vice president, and a president. And they have 2 houses, an upper house and a lower house. But the significant thing about it, 31% of this country is actually desert. It's 1.4 times the size of Kenya, yet its population is a half of the population of the city of Nairobi. It's very sparsely populated. As someone asked yesterday, shouldn't we move there? And I said, well, I'm sure there's lots of space in the desert. We can move there, yes.
It's a beautiful country.
Yes, it is. The proverb for the day: envy and green grow from the same stalk.
Envy and green grow from the same stalk. Rose, what's your interpretation of this one?
It's the coexistence of the complexities that we live with as human beings, where from whence comes good can also come evil, and bad from whence comes positivity can also come negativity. So as we are saying in Staj, the glass is half full, not half empty.
Rose, are you a poet?
I love poetry.
You wax very lyrically this morning.
I do love poetry.
It's a good one. It's a good one, Rose.
Yeah.
Dr. Muller, what's your interpretation of it?
Yeah, it's a thinker. It's a thinker. This one. But I was also going kind of in that direction. I mean, the things are never in our lives today. I very often get a bit annoyed by the way things are made simple. They're either exceedingly good or exceedingly bad. And that applies to so many things. Politicians, political parties. We've just had elections in the Netherlands where the most crazy dichotomies were put forward by politicians in order to win or to lose. And in fact, life is so much more complex. And I think that's what this kind of reminds me of, that it is often a lot more difficult than we think. And our task is, in a way, to embrace the complexity and let it be and deal with that rather than try and make it simple.
Absolutely.
City, mark this one.
If this were an exam and we're marking it out of just 10, you would get 11. And so would you. The beauty of being asked to give your opinion, one, you can't possibly be wrong. But the additional mark that you've gotten above 10 is because you've gone beyond just explaining it. You've contextualized it, and you've given it a few more legs to walk with. Now, when you give it wings to fly, then you might get 13 out of 10.
We will revisit at the end of
for the next
program.
exam. Our topic today is how Kenya is changing the face of justice through a people-centered approach. We know that there will be an address by the Chief Justice tomorrow. We'll be talking about that shortly. But first, let's get to understand this institute that you represent, HIL, the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law. Tell us about it. What is it?
We were created a little over 15 years ago as an institute to look into the justice gap, to look into the fact that access to justice in most countries in the world is far from being a reality, and to look at it with a bit of a different lens. We were seeing that a lot of the solutions to the access to justice gap were what I would call more business as usual. And I also observed that the justice gap in the world is probably one of the most invisible problems that we have today. So it's just a general global statistic is that we would see anywhere between half to 2/3 of the people in most countries in the world do not have adequate access to justice. And the ones that do get access to justice, generally we see that only about 1/3 get anywhere close near a resolution for what they want. And I always say, what if that was education? What if 2/3 of the children in the world would not get access to education, or 2/3 of the people would not get access to health? And if only 1/3 were happy with what they got, there'd be outrage.
Yep.
And this is not a problem that is all that visible. So I suppose in a way we represent also the outrage. But we want to go beyond that. It's outrage, but also coming up with innovative solutions. That's why we have the word innovation in our title, in our name. Innovation, new thinking, to try and solve this and close this justice gap.
What are some of the solutions?
There are many, because it's a complex problem. Obviously, again, we were referring to the proverb that the world is not simple. So you can't say, well, all judges are lazy, so we should make them work harder, or lawyers are not doing what they're supposed to do, so we should retrain them. It's not that simple. It takes a lot more than that. But there are a couple of things that we have identified, and not just us. We're in a leading group in the world, but We work with many other partners internationally, universities, think tanks, international organizations. So there are many fellow developers and travelers down this road. But there's a couple of things we do know. One is you need data. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't solve it. And that's a bit of a shocker for many lawyers, because lawyers don't like data. And in fact, in most law schools, you don't get data. I often call it the equivalent of epidemiology in the health sector. You know, if I wake up my wife, who's a general practitioner, at 4 a.m. in the morning, and I ask her, what are the 4 most prevalent diseases that children have? She will tell me.
Yep.
If I wake up an average lawyer friend at 4 in the morning and I say, what are the 4 most prevalent justice diseases people have? They probably wouldn't have a clue. So data is one important thing. You have to know who has, and let's just use the equivalent, who has which justice disease. Are they men? Are they women? Are they old? Are they young? Are they urban? Are they rural? Are they highly educated, lower educated? What's the journey to justice that they take? How does it work? Do they get resolution? Where do they get information? Where do they go for resolution? What is the impact of the problem on their lives? All this stuff you need to know. And only if you know that can you start taking steps. The second is that on the basis of that data, you could start adopting much more evidence-based approaches. And one of the things that we lawyers, and I'm a lawyer myself, so I'm also making fun of myself, but we lawyers tend to think that if we have a judgment or a law, then we have reality. And of course, that's often not the case. So we're saying we need to move more to evidence-based working. Again, something that is quite normal in the world of education, that's quite normal in the world of health. What are good interventions that help solve, let's say, small land problems? What are effective interventions that help solve problems around employment, around crime? You can actually collect best practices, and you can weed out worst practices, and you can share best practices. And if the whole community working on justice were to do that, then the quality of the service that is delivered would be much higher. And the third element that we highlight all the time is innovation. Many of the models that we use to get the interventions that work to people are still the same old models that we had in 1850, and in many parts of Africa, 1850 in the UK or in another colonial power, and they were enshrined in law, and that's what we do. So we're also saying innovate the delivery models. Try and think differently. How can you get interventions that work to people that need them when they need them against a sustainable funding model? And a courtroom or a law firm are just 2 ways you can get justice to people, but you can get justice to people in many different ways. One of the interesting things that we see from the data in Kenya, for example, is how much trust the institution of a chief has here. Yeah. People trust them, people use them, people go there. It's also surprising how much trust there is in for many problems, not all of them, but in policemen. So there's a lot you could do there, and you can also use technology. So innovation is really important, and so these are kind of the new elements that we bring in. And the overriding central point in everything is don't put the institutions at the center, but put the outcomes that people need at the center. And I like to compare that with the health sector. It's not important how many hospitals you build, how many operations you do as a surgeon per year. What counts is how much health are you producing. So we say the same here. How much justice is being produced in which area? That's what you need to measure. That's what you need to work on. That's what your strategy should be about. That's what your accountability should be about.
I'm curious. What started you off on this journey?
Oh, many things. One is that I was very much involved in the setting up of the international criminal tribunals, and I worked for the UN for a long time. And what I really found is that once things totally deteriorate and you reach the stage where you need a Rwanda tribunal or a Yugoslav tribunal or an international criminal court, you're often too late. Things have usually escalated to a level that it's I won't say beyond repair, but very difficult to repair. So I was thinking we have to go further downstream. We have to, solve the daily justice needs that people have. And I slowly started observing, in my professional life, that's where there's a lot of failing. We don't know. I didn't know how bad it was until we started researching this and looking at the numbers. But it's around us every day. One of the questions I sometimes like to ask when I speak to people is, how many of you have been close to, let's say, an employment problem or a divorce problem? And then I would ask them to stand up. And then I would ask, how many of you can say that problem was effectively, speedily, fairly resolved to your satisfaction with great gratitude to the judiciary in your country or lawyers? And then, in fact, most people sit down again. That's just the way people experience it. And that has to change. And it can change, because there are so many amazing judges and lawyers and jurists in the world who want to see this differently and want to operate differently. And as we'll talk about later, Kenya's, I think, leading the charge on a lot of that.
So essentially what you're doing is you're questioning the very concept of justice.
I guess questioning it, maybe not questioning it in the sense that we're not asking whether it's important or not. We're saying we've got to make it happen. It needs to be something that is experienced by people, that is usable by people, that you can access, that you could use in your daily life. Because the impact of not getting justice is huge. The kind of things we measure are mental health, emotional stress, loss of income, loss of time. It has a huge impact on people's lives if they walk around with an unresolved justice problem. And that we also increasingly see is a cost to society. If people lose their income because it takes 5 years to solve a particular justice problem, or because they don't even know that the problem they have is a justice problem that could be resolved, then that is bad for the economy if they lose their income, and it's bad for the people themselves. If family problems are not solved quickly and in a good way, children may not go to school anymore. Children may end up in crime. There's a lot of things that could happen. So the impact of not doing this is also significant, we're seeing.
Rose, even as we talk about this and talk about the fact that more so than maybe with previous Chief Justices, we've seen that the push has been to actually then have people at the center of justice, and to say that access to justice is something that must be recognized through every process. It doesn't matter whether you're at security agency police process. It doesn't matter whether you're in the court. It doesn't matter whether it becomes then a remand issue. But at every level, everyone must access this justice. And so we are breaking down this monolith of confusion that was there before and saying, individuals must see that has worked. What are some of the ways that we actually see this practically, that people are being put at the very center of access to justice over the last few years?
Thank you. If you think back to 1963, it's going to be 60 years in December. And if you think about how our justice system has evolved, there has to be an acceptance and understanding that actually the post-pre-colonial justice system was a power construct. It was actually developed to serve the ruling class and to settle political scores. And if we are taking score 60 years later, we have to ask ourselves, how has it evolved? And most importantly, because for us, I think the system of governance that we've chosen is a post-2010 system of governance. And that's our starting point. That's the baseline. And when you think about the files and the cases that we say are pending in court, we are no longer calling them files. We are calling them justice journeys. These are people's lives. And so when you walk into the registry, We are reorienting our registry staff and people who work in the judiciary to think of those as people's lives, justice journeys. What has it taken for that justice journey to actually find itself on the shelf? And that is changing the way that we conceptualize things. But also, if you think about what happens and the document that the Chief Justice is going to launch tomorrow, which is the Social Transformation Through Access to Justice Blueprint, we also think about what we observe and what the data is telling us, what the evidence is telling us about what people actually need. It is a sad reality in this country that demolitions could happen on Saturday because citizens cannot access courts to access orders. And the blueprint and the judiciary conversation has been, why don't we have 24-hour duty courts? If we have a healthcare system that actually operates on a 24-hour basis, why not have a justice system that does the same? And this is more so because justice, education, healthcare are at the center of human dignity. And so we also are giving back that O2, and we're using that concept of dignity, that when you approach any institution of the judiciary, but also when you're resolving disputes within the family, within the community, with chiefs, with the police, the central remit has to actually be the recognition of human dignity. And we are seeing this because we are looking at access to justice for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, and we recognize that it cannot be a similar system to other disputes. There is a human dignity issue at the core of the violation, and that has informed the establishment of the 12 specialized SGBV courts that we are using as an innovative component to understand how specialized justice there needs to be. Children. We cannot mix children, and we cannot handle disputes relating to children much the same way as we handle other disputes. And that's where mediation comes in. And mediation is not the arena for lawyers. It's not. Mediation concerns families, it concerns elders, it concerns accredited practitioners who actually reconcile families. So if you think about a family related issue and why we are pushing families towards mediation, is that, strictly speaking, if you go at it in an adversarial system in court, at the end of it, you have a fragmented family. But our concern and the charge we have from the Constitution is to actually build resilient, cohesive societies and families. And mediation allows for families to engage in conversation. And so we are using justice champions in the form of judges, magistrates, elders, mediators to actually, rally around the cause of reconciliation, of problem solving, not necessarily, churning data that we have resolved 70,000 cases. But our concern right now is how many families have been reconciled. How have we dealt with the root causes of this problem? And so it's a shift. It's a shift in the way that we understand justice, that we atomize justice, that we redesign our courts, that we retool and retrain our judges and magistrates towards people-centered justice, and not to perpetuate the power-structured system that we inherited at independence. 60 years later, we cannot continue thinking about our institutions as institutions that actually maintain the political rubric. We have to think about them as institutions that secure the dignity, lives, and hope that Kenyans have in our country.
It's a big transformation. We'll talk about it shortly as we continue this conversation. Moving away from looking at justice in an adversarial manner. That I'm coming to court, I want justice, you must be punished, I must win, I must go home victor, and you must suffer. And seeing how to change that. That's why we call it the social transformation through access to justice. We'll talk about that shortly. And also Rose Washuka will be telling us about tomorrow's launch of the social transformation through access to justice, blueprint, and what it means, where it's taking us, and why it's important to launch it at this particular point. 28 minutes to 8, our guests this morning on this Justice Thursday conversation. Dr. Sam Mula is the CEO of the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law, and Rose Washuka is the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Chief Justice. We'll be back shortly. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Safaricom has introduced a youth platform which is giving customers freedom to choose what products they prefer, how much to spend, and surprisingly, even the validity period. Join me, Yolanda Mulwa, and DJ Absolute every weekday from 11 a.m. to 3 o'clock to find out more. Get hooked and tap into Vision Yako. Connect, grow, and do more.
My skin is my identity and deserves care made specially for me. New Nivea Radiant and Beauty Advanced Care with 5 oils and 5 vitamins helps reduce appearance of stretch marks in just 2 weeks. For your shade of beautiful.
Ka University invites you to its 12th graduation ceremony on Friday, 24th November 2023. All graduates are requested to be seated by 7:45 a.m. at the graduation pavilion. The chief guest will be Professor Kithure Kindiki, Cabinet Secretary for Interior and National Administration.
I want to say I'm very proud of the class that is graduating. They demonstrated discipline, they demonstrated academic prowess, and they have managed to graduate with merit. And we shall even conduct a ceremony of returning back the students, the parents, and guardians. So we expect the parents to come and receive their children who will have gotten degrees, diplomas, and certificates. And I want once again to say congratulations, class 2023, go conquer the world. The sky is but just a stepping stone for you.
This event will be live on KTN Home and streamed on its social media platforms. Chuka University, knowledge is wealth.
We value your feedback and welcome.
Hello, my name is Asta Gisharu. I'm the founder of the Boulder Collection, which is a fashion brand producing bags, and I'm a millennial on the move. My number one mantra is always to be bold and to do what I need to do. Even if I feel I'm scared to do it, I remember, just be bold and do what you need to do. And catch me on this week's Millennial on the Move.
Only. No, unafikiria tu, unasema tu only, unafikiria tu ni jambo la kawaida tu hivyo.
It's a normal thing.
You know, we used to stay together, then all of a sudden...
Was it my fault?
Whose fault?
Yours. Sio mimi nilihepa?
Oh, mimi nilihepa.
Ulianza madharau. Na kupigia simu ushiki. Utumi pesa ya nyumba.
Are you sure?
That's why I stopped bothering you.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm very sure. Ndio nimekumiss. Asante kwa kukuja anyway.
You know that I'm single.
Greater tour.
Yes, man. I'm single again.
Nyanjo tu wangu Arsenal. Season yetu si wali. I be like
Terminator, I the deliver. Kama umemchoka tuachie sisi. Asemaje? Tumle paka mifupa sisi ndo mafisi.
Tatua.
Alini block, saying I scan and stop. Anasema brandy, will rewind.
The discussions are even more pertinent because when the matter gets to any court and a determination is made, at that point history is actually made because it becomes a precedent. It's something that is a constant reference point until maybe something other than that and which has more gravitas comes into being. So it is not just fundamental, it actually gets to the heart of the matter. When I ask the question about justice, first of all, how we perceive it, how we've interacted with it, and what we see it as. And what you described, Eric, is what we perceive justice to be. If I think I have an issue that requires a resolution and I win, then that is justice. But is it? Because is it? If that process doesn't bring about an education in understanding that a problem isn't just the determination, but everything else that goes into the determination, and understanding the realities of it, and that's where the data and that's where the information comes in. So it's a learning process, even as you get to the end of it. So even if I receive the short end of the stick, I will understand why I've received the short end of the stick. Now, when I understand it, even if in our understanding of the law, I have lost, but I don't leave feeling I have actually lost. It just means I know what I could have done different. Okay? But that isn't the situation we have currently. And our waters are muddied even further because it is believed that a lot of the processes in our system are up for sale. People can bribe their way into it. So now that subverts the system completely. Now, even if it's just 2 or 3 courts, the problem with us as Kenyans is we do not need 10 courts. We just need one example and we will tarnish the entire judicial system. They'll be tarred with that same brush.
Yeah, you're right. Again, it is an understanding of what justice means. And as we've been developing this document, we've also had to refer to the Constitution many, many times. Because what happened in 2010 in Kenya was a revolution towards Kenyans saying that we have aspirations, and this is how we want to live our aspirations. And so social transformation through access to justice is living the aspirations of the Constitution, so that the Constitution first and foremost says that the people are king. They are at the center of governance, whether at political institutions or the service institutions such as the judiciary. And then Article 19 says, look, we understand that our society is stratified. We have marginalized and vulnerable members of society. Whatever you do, you must remember there has to be programs and initiatives that cater to vulnerable members of society. It doesn't stop there. The Constitution moves to Article 48 and says justice is not for sale. And so if justice then becomes unattainable because it is expensive, then it goes against a human right called access to justice. In Article 159, the Constitution says, look, we understand that we have adopted a globalized system of law, but we have alternative justice systems that are ingrained in our indigenous knowledge. Use them. Use elders. Use systems that have been used for years in our African setting to resolve disputes. Because in 2017, SAMS Institute and the judiciary collaborated to actually assess justice needs. And one of the outcomes of those justice needs was, one, that only 10% of Kenyans who have disputes go to courts. They go to chiefs, they go to police, so there's an entire ecosystem that we need to look at and then support, which is why the NCAJ, the National Council on Administration of Justice, becomes very critical. And then it proceeded to say that every year, on average, we have 7 million complex legal problems. Okay? So if we have 7 million complex legal problems, how come we don't see those numbers? They're not in courts. And so there is a 20 million justice gap in Kenya. And that justice gap cannot be resolved through courts only. because courts are one strand. And that's why we are saying multiple door access to justice. So that the Constitution appoints the judiciary as the vanguard towards access to justice, to protecting and defending its aspirations. And in that role, the Chief Justice has actually reminded us time and again that we must care for all systems of access to justice. That if a family comes and says, oh, we have agreed that we are going to manage affairs of our family in this way, we cannot infantilize them to say that no, that is not the way, because that is autonomy of resolving disputes, and it leads towards social transformation. If we recognize that Kenyans actually look to chiefs to resolve disputes, then we cannot be isolated as a judiciary, and that's why the tool of court users committees then becomes critical. Court users committees brings all the actors within an institution to actually talk about how are we dispensing justice, which cases are elders handling, what kind of support do they need, what aspects are the police dealing with, how do we need them to support them. On the question of accountability, we are saying, look, we need a national justice dialogue. But we also need a national accountability in justice dialogue, so that we actually understand when we talk about accountability and when prominent lawyers accuse the judiciary of bribery, who goes to those courts? Can they tell and can they show that I went to the Supreme Court, I asked to be heard on this matter, and because I'm accusing that there was bribery, I gave this amount and it was accepted. Can we then push the envelope? Can we bring Kenyans along with us to ask the hard questions? But can we also institute an accountability meter? Because we need to know what is it a perception of lack of accountability, or what is it? What are our accountability mechanisms as the judiciary? But also, going beyond the courts, we also have to ask ourselves, how are we treating the family? How are we treating the individual? How are we treating communities? How are we treating our ecology, which is where the concept of green justice comes through? And when we look at that ecosystemic approach in access to justice, then we are able to ask ourselves, what do we do with the 20 million Kenyans who are excluded from the formal justice system? And yet, the judiciary is the vanguard. The Constitution says that you utilize courts, tribunals, alternative justice systems, alternative dispute resolution. The revolution is not brought about by an institution that wants to be activist. It is by a constitution that is very alive to the realities of Kenyans, and which, if understood and implemented, would actually cause a bloodless revolution towards where the constitution is leading us.
It's where we look at justice, like you said, and it's what we espouse as our ideals in ensuring access to justice for all in our constitution and in the institutions that we've created. But I'm sure many jurists will argue this way, and this comes to you, Dr. Muller, that, when you have this formal justice system, like CT had alluded to earlier, a court or even established alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as mediation, arbitration and all have records. Records means that you have jurisprudence that's being set that then can later be used in studies and in future decision making. But when you go into this AJS, when you go to a chief or a council of elders who sit and they hit something on the ground and they say, this is what we shall determine, and there's no record of that. So it's really not helping the entire justice journey of the country. What do you say?
No, it's a question that my fellow lawyers like to raise very often as a huge issue. But let's bring it back to those 7 million justice problems a year in Kenya. Most people of that 7 million group want a resolution to their problem and want to continue their lives. And that's one of the key things that keeps coming up. If you put outcomes at the center, what do people want? You're right. They want to be heard. They want to understand the process. And there is very solid research that shows, as you have said, people don't necessarily want to win. They want to be heard. They want to experience some neutrality. They want to understand the process. They want to have some kind of fair outcome. And mostly they want to move on with their lives. So this idea that people always want to win, and that it is absolutely critical that each case sets some kind of precedent for everybody else, doesn't really respond to reality. It is important to have records, and that could, for example, be is one of the innovations that we're talking that is being looked at in many countries. Can you create, for example, using technology, a simple, easy-to-use record-keeping system, mechanism that somehow functions between what the so-called informal justice mechanisms do and the formal mechanisms do, so that also when a formal mechanism, a formal judge picks up a case, he or she could see from the system, but this has already been looked at by a chief. This has already been looked at by somebody else. These are the kind of things that already emerged, so that it doesn't start all over again. Because that sometimes happens. There's a lot of forum shopping. I go here, I go there, and I see where I can win. So you can certainly deal with that. And precedents are important, but there are many other ways you can do that. Not every single case needs to go to the Supreme Court for a precedent-setting ruling. Sometimes that is important, and those cases you can filter out. But most cases, they just want resolution, and they want people want to move on with their lives. I think that's very important. And last thing I would say, that is really also a new idea that came out of this people-centered justice way of working. A teasing question I like to ask ministers of justice when I meet them in the world is, who in your country is the minister responsible for the prevention of justice problems? And of course there is never an answer, because the justice system only deals with problems when they arise. Where have we made most progress in access to health and access to education? And let me stress again, access to health and access to education over the last 30 years have constantly gone up all over the world. Access to justice has not. In fact, it is declining. And where a lot of progress has been made is in the prevention. And there's also a lot of prevention work that can be done in the justice field by adopting better laws, by doing many things that are also,
But why is that? Why should the law be lagging behind, or the practice of it? Why does it lag behind?
That's an interesting question that we've pondered over a lot. And again, I go back to your proverb. It's not an easy one. But maybe I could just venture a few things that I've seen. I think one critical thing is the lack of data. My son did his bachelor's degree in law a few years ago, and I kind of followed him. And it was very interesting to see. So he did his bachelor's degree 30 years after I did it. And frankly, when I kind of followed what he was doing more or less the same stuff that I was doing 30 years ago. I have a niece who is studying medicine, and my wife is a doctor. I think if my wife understands 30% of what my niece is learning now, that's already great. So that shows you that the legal profession is not really developing. They don't have data as a standard part of the curriculum. They don't have a lot of what I call epidemiology. There's been a lot of research, for example, in the world of economics. They created behavioral economics, where they kind of find out, how do people really take decisions. Sociology, psychology, neurology has taught us a lot. That's not really part of the legal profession. So I think that's part of it. Another one is that users, because there's no data, users are often not at the table. There's also a lot of shame, of course, around justice problems. You don't mind saying, I have cancer, but you do mind saying, I think I have a divorce, or I have a land problem. It's more difficult to talk about. In the health sector, you've got associations of of, for example, heart disease patients. You've got associations, and they keep the health profession on their toes. There's nothing really to the equivalent of that in the justice sector.
Association of murderers.
And lastly, maybe. Well, you've got victims associations. You're starting to see more of that, which is, I think, very good. And lastly, and this is also, I think, something we should look in the eye. If you want to call it, the justice marketplace is a monopolistic market. I mean, it's dominated by lawyers. In the health sector, not all directors of hospitals are doctors.
True.
Not all medical.
Not all public health practitioners are doctors.
Right. So the market needs to open. We need to open up, which is something that not all bar associations, law societies, and others like. But that has to happen.
I hear you on some of the things that you're saying, and interestingly enough, this data is right here. And it's staring us in the face, but it's not being collated, it's not being collected and being used. And the information or data from where I see it is the individuals who are accessing and engaging with this system every day. It's the individual who has been granted bail or bond, but has to sit in the courtroom the whole day because another system, whereby you would hope was incorporated into this in the name of the police, wants to make sure that individual is there, and we can see how we can have this net of corruption continuing. It's the individual who tosses trash on the road and doesn't want to be in remand because they can't afford a fine, but they want to be able to be understood and then be let go on their own recognizance. That's the data that we should be collecting and using. So the question here is, even as we're looking at this access and saying that it must be people-centered, are the other institutions that are part of this process also being brought in to this conversation? Because without that, then it becomes a very surface level discussion or conversation. Again, individuals who could be fined on the spot as opposed to going into a system where they have to hire representation. Office of a Public Defender, for example, for people who do not have access to funds to represent themselves. Looking at not having to sit a whole day waiting for a bond to be paid where the magistrate signed your paper at 9 o'clock. Do you see? So where is all of this happening so that all these people are coming together?
There's a wonderful coordination mechanism that we have in Kenya called the National Council on Administration of Justice, and the Chief Justice chairs that body. And the NCAJ coordinates justice actors. And actually, data is being collected. The NCAJ released their annual report about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, they were here.
Exactly, and they've been speaking about it. And tomorrow also, as a baseline to start, the Chief Justice will also release the annual State of the Judiciary Address, something that the Chief Justices in Germany, in Israel and other places, Pakistan actually have written to say is one of the most open. The understanding that these issues that we are observing need to be resolved. For instance, the issue of the integrity of bail and bond processes have been addressed by practice directions by the Chief Justice, requiring the judicial officer to actually take charge. So that the order is not issued and then there are clandestine things that happen in the basements or outside, or it's not issued at 4 o'clock so that you can spend another night in and so that your people can come and bribe. But it is also about understanding and having these conversations at the NCAJ, honest conversations about where are we going wrong. And in this new approach of social transformation through access to justice, we are no longer just looking at a judge or a magistrate as a judge or a magistrate. We are looking at and we are redesigning the role of judge into 4 roles. One, as an adjudicator of disputes, which is what sets precedent. And by the way, 70% of all disputes resolved in courts are actually resolved in the magistrates' courts, which doesn't have precedent-setting value. And so the argument falls on its face that we actually do need that to legitimize decisions. Those decisions go to the superior courts, and it is a system of sort of, seeing that there's a bit of uniformity in how the law is applied. So one, as an adjudicator of disputes. Two, as a promoter of social harmony. That when a case is before you, you've got to ask yourself, how do we need to leave society? What does this case mean for the country, for society, for family, for the environment? Third, as a facilitator of dialogue, because dialogue is very, very critical in getting to the root and bringing up evidence around social conflict. And finally, as a connector of justice champions. Do we know who the justice champions are? Lawyers, parties who come to court, civil society members who support and facilitate access to legal information. And so when the judge sits and wears the four hats under Sturge as a promoter of social harmony, as a connector of justice champions, as an adjudicator of disputes, and as a facilitator of dialogue. More importantly, there is an element in Sturge called judicial hygiene, which is what Sam referenced, preventative justice. If we can have conversations in our communities, in our societies, facilitated by CUCs and facilitated by other actors coordinated at the NCEJ, then we are able to know that there is a likelihood that there is going to be a conflict of this nature, and we need to do X in order to avert that. So, for instance, we need to do X to avert corruption, we need to do Y to avert extrajudicial killings, we need to do Z to make sure that we have instant fines, because also the manual system is actually open to abuse. The difficulty, as with all coordination mechanisms, is how do you attain perfect coordination? And that is a question that is the dilemma that we are grappling with, and we're having conversations about.
How do you change human behavior? How do you get people to understand all this, and how do you get them to appreciate? Because this is...
By handing them agency. By making sure that they understand that they are active actors.
How do you do that?
Let's see it as the Chief Justice launches the Sturge tomorrow. So what time will it be? It will be live on KTN.
Yes, it will be live on KTN. Right. The ceremony starts at 10 in the morning.
Right. As she delivers the state of, it's called the state of the
Judiciary and Administration of
Justice report, and also she launches the social transformation through access to justice blueprint tomorrow. Thank you very much, Rose and Dr. Muller, for joining us. Rose is the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Chief Justice. Dr. Sam Muller is the CEO from the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law. 8 a.m. Conversations continue. Good morning.